Hello and welcome to episode 12 of the Lost Decades podcast. We are covering the years 1720 BC to 1700 years before Christ.
Ooh, or before
Um,
Common Era.
oh, either one,
Yeah.
dealer's choice. So we're doing a little bit of I don't know if it'll be a shorter episode time-wise, but in terms of the years, which it's not like an extraordinary, it's not like a Hammurabi situation where there's a really famous thing happening or like a ton really happening, but
Opposite.
kind of the opposite. Yeah, it's kind of not that it's like stable, it's that it's like so chaotic that it's hard to really like get even a picture of like what's happening or like something interesting. Like you don't know the life story of many of the kings because it's such a short reign, and that's usually all the information you get is when someone's the king. So, but I do think it's a good time to kind of reflect on the century. We're at the
Yeah,
1700
like
mark,
expand our
and
worldview because we've been so
yeah,
Egypt, Mesopotamia focused. We know
yeah.
other things are going on. We just haven't talked about it because it's not that there's nothing going
Mhm.
on. There's not a lot to talk about every week. But since we have kind of a slower week, we can kind of go into other things that are happening throughout the world.
And I just realized I wasn't sharing my screen, so there we are. But I wanted to start off this week. I kind of teased them last week, but I wanted to talk about the Minoans.
Yeah.
So this is a map of the Mediterranean around this time in the Bronze Age. And you can see it's just showing how all these cities that were connected throughout the Mediterranean, but one of them is on the island of Crete, and that's where the Minoans were located. Who were the Minoans? I want to give a shout out to the YouTuber Epimetheus because he makes good videos, and Sai is another good
Psy.
YouTuber.
History with Psy. I like that guy
History with
too.
Sai. He's really good, especially for Egypt. So anyway, the Minoans are on this island of Crete off the coast of Greece, and they're really famous for having jumping over bulls in their art. Not just bulls, but people jumping over bulls. And one theory is that they didn't really practice very much warfare and or like duels. They would settle a lot of fights by doing like a bull jumping sort of situation. Like maybe if you survived jumping over the bull, then you won the theoretical battle.
I mean, it makes
That's
sense
one theory.
where as stupid as it sounds, it's like you're losing less men. Then I know that's a common thing going into modern times. What they talk about, the British and the Americans were like, we're banning duels because two people who are very important just keep shooting at each other till one of them dies, and everyone in terms of the country is worse off because of that. So,
Yeah, the less murdering in a society is better, the better.
yeah.
Um, yeah, so the Minoans are essentially the first, what we would consider a European civilization that we have some sort of record of, and they have art that we can look at.
They're
So,
surprisingly from Anatolia, at least the research I could do.
oh,
Is that they
interesting.
were like no one knows for sure. Again, we are on a kind of guesstimation kind of thing, but they think that they traveled west from Anatolia and found the island and kind of started setting up trade farms, sort of
And
districts.
since they were
All I mean
on
is
this
yeah, early
sort
age.
of somewhat small island, like they were some of the best sailors and best boat builders of the time.
Well, it makes sense because it's funny. They talk about the island being very mountainous, meant that
Hmm.
even though the island's very thin, and long. It's actually easier, which I guess is true for a lot of societies, depending on where you are.
Hmm.
It's just easier to send goods through ships as opposed to going through land. Having something try to pull it, having a big cart, just put it on a ship and you can travel between all these different islands and
Hmm.
you can trade easier. And then the side effect of that is by doing that so much, you develop very good naval skills, a very good navy,
Yeah.
which is surprisingly good in an ocean environment. Well, to be fair, it's a sea, but
And it
still.
and from what I saw, it seems like they really didn't have to fight very much. Like, not only were they kind of peaceful with each other, but I think because they were kind of protected on this island that was easy to defend, they just no one really messed with them. And probably because they were known for good traders, like people don't usually want to like destroy a whole like group of traders because then they lose access to
Well, and
resources.
it's interesting because it still blows my mind that their cities didn't have walls. I'm not saying wall, like, I don't know. I'm splitting hairs, but you get what I mean.
Mm.
They didn't need, because we talk so much about when we were in Mesopotamia, about these massive walls. And like you go and you tear down the walls or you rebuild these huge walls. In Crete, the Minoans didn't really need the walls because, as far as we're aware, because one of the things is we don't have a Rosetta Stone, so we can't actually read their writing, but from the
Yeah.
historical basis that we have, their cities didn't really have walls. They didn't have large defenses other
Hmm.
than a port. And it kind of goes to show that clearly the cities on the island all got along. They got along
Right.
very well, and that they had a vetted interest in getting along because it was kind of like an us versus them mentality of, hey, if we control trade and we all work together, we all benefit. While all these other guys are
Hmm.
stabbing each other in the back and invading different countries, we can be on our little island and just benefit from trade.
And it does seem like they maybe weren't necessarily a full-on matriarchal society, but they
Mhm.
had a lot of images of women in their art, and like in a lot of like the sort of more religious art, it would have like female goddesses and stuff, and like there were men, but it just seems like there's like a heavy emphasis on the women, and I think partially because the men were more of like the sailors and the traders, they were always like off the island, like doing that. So the women were the ones on the island doing like they were doing like politics, like just like local like trading and kind of just
Well, I think they
running.
mentioned Sparta as an example of something similar, which I thought was kind of cool to think about, where they said the men are always out of these penal colonies, which I know today means usually prisons, but more they're living together, training together, fighting together. And so the women are like at home managing the farm, managing the slaves, managing the economy, managing the trade. They're the ones dealing with all of that while the men are out getting buff, fighting each other,
Hmm.
learning how to win wars, which I'm not
That's the
saying.
thing, yeah. Like when you think about how easy it was to die as a man, like for most of history, where it's like how often you're
Yeah.
going to a battle and how like brutal the battles were, that like it makes sense that women were doing most of like what we do nowadays used to be like mainly women doing it because like
Yeah.
men were off like fighting and other stuff. Yeah.
No, it makes sense. I
Crazy.
thought it was interesting too that they talked about the trading works, obviously led them, you were showing in that thing, to Egypt. And a fun side thing that I thought was funny is that they would trade a lot of the different goods they had. And they realized that by trading with Egypt, they could get a lot of gold. And the reason I thought that was funny is remember how I mentioned
Mhm.
gold was worth less than silver in
Yeah,
Egypt? Because
because
they
yeah,
had
Egypt had a lot of
so
gold.
much. They had so much gold. So then the Minoans were like, wait a minute, we can get all this gold, again, through trade, not conquest. We can just get all this gold. And it's actually worth more than the stuff we make. And we can just use this gold to trade throughout um, the Eastern Mediterranean in general. And it was so
Mhm.
funny that they even took it one step farther, where they said the Minoans were the ones doing stuff with the gold. Whereas most people would take the gold and be like, yeah, it's gold, it's shiny, it's worth a lot. Here you go. And they'd be like, whoa, we can actually make like necklaces and statues and, bronze, or I said bronze, sorry, gold ornaments and different things that you need. And then they could essentially take a block of gold and make it worth even more than what they paid for it by turning it into something else, which I thought was
Yeah.
something everyone was doing. And to a degree they were, but not to the level of the Minoans. The Minoans were
Okay.
seen as like the experts at that, the artisans in their craft with gold and
That's cool.
gems and all that. I don't know. I think that's
And it's
super.
cool that you can still do stuff like that. Like that's like a good place in the market. It's like, all right, you just get some sort of raw material and you like make clothes or you make like some sort of craft and then you like sell it on Etsy or something. That's kind of what
Yeah.
they were doing.
No, I mean it is, and it's funny because it seems so simple, but it makes sense when a lot of these other countries were focused on bureaucracy, war, other things like that, that they didn't really have time to.
Mining raw resources.
They would mine right resource, but they didn't have the time to devote to the arts. Other than pottery, it seems like the
Yeah.
arts were not neglected. Everyone saw it as important, but it was seen as a luxury that we can't really
Well, yeah, it
afford.
does. I mean, I'm not an expert on this, but I mean, obviously Egypt has like art, but it does seem more focused around like pharaohs and like especially the pyramids, like when they're tombs. It's like all their religion's all focused on death. So I don't
Hmm.
know how often they were making art that wasn't around death, if that makes sense.
No, I fully get what you mean because whereas
Yeah.
the Minoans had a lot more free time to dedicate to that stuff, their society could deal more
Well,
with that.
also, yeah, speaking of crafts and everything, well, real quick, you mentioned that we can't read what they're writing. We call it linear A, and this is an example of it. But it's interesting to me that, we've translated so many languages that I would have had no idea how to even begin translating. And like, you'd think that by 2026, we could have like, all right, we can figure out any language, but it's kind of cool that there's still some that maybe we've partially translated some letters or something, but
We on that bottom row, it's
it's a
clearly
mystery.
a plug in the wall. I can tell.
Yeah. Yeah,
Ancient alien.
it was actually Atlantis. They had
Yeah.
electricity. But
Uh-huh.
speaking of art and everything, I know I said this last week, but the um, Minoans traded with the
Ooh.
Cyclades. I don't know exactly how to pronounce it. Here we go. They're these islands
The
that are
Aegean
north
island.
of Crete, and they're right between Greece and Turkey, and there's all these little tiny islands. And I would love to go there today on like a cruise or
Yeah, they're
something.
the Aegean islands. What I think is funny too, to go on that tangent, modern day Greece, because of the conflicts between Greece and Turkey after World War II,
Hmm.
Greece actually controls all of the islands in the Aegean Sea that aren't within 3 miles of the Turkish coast, which is such a weird thing. But it's funny how, even though you'd think it'd be split in the middle, but if you look at that, you see that line right there. That's how much Greece controls versus how much Turkey controls. Greece controls almost all of the Aegean islands.
When is this happening?
I believe it was after World War One. It might have been
Oh,
after
World
World
War
War
One.
Two. Or
Okay,
sorry, I
yeah.
meant World War Two, but it might have been after World War One. But it had to do with the whole. Well, actually, no, maybe it is World War One. So I apologize if I'm talking wrong, because
No, I
again,
know
it
what
was
you're
the
talking
Ottoman
about.
Empire falling, which was
Yeah.
the end of World War One. But World War Two kind of shuffled things up again.
I
And I
think
know
it
one
was
of the big things they
before.
talked about was who was going to
Yeah.
get Constantinople. They gave it to Turkey, who eventually renamed it Istanbul. But as a consolation prize, if you will, they gave all the Aegean islands to Greece, any of the islands that were more than three
Mm,
miles off the coast, I believe. And it's
okay.
just kind of
That's
funny to
cool.
look at. Like,
I mean, I've always noticed that on the map that you look at Greece and it's like all these little islands, but I didn't realize how few Turkey had. But
hmm.
it's
So
interesting.
I know it's a tangent, but it also fits with what we're talking about. The Minoans setting up,
Hmm.
because it happened slightly before. I read around the 1800 BC, setting up the Mycenaean Empire, or not empire, but colonies, maybe is the right way to
City
say it.
states, I don't
Different.
know. Yeah.
They're kind of just setting up, you know, trade routes, kind of like the Phoenicians within Greece, but funny enough, that leads to more Greek culture. So the Mycenaeans are literally directly underneath the Minoans, setting up these different colonies along Helios and along like near Athens and stuff like that in modern day
Hmm.
Greece.
Yeah, they're gonna come in. So, one reason I'm bringing them up this episode is that 1700 you could kind of say is their peak. It's when, I don't know, right around now is when a volcano erupts and it really kind of messes things up for them, which makes sense. But it actually, from what I had seen, it seems like that strangely like motivated them to like rebuild everything and like it was like kind of their peak of building these giant palaces and I don't know, it kind of was like, all right, we have
We
to
have to go
rebuild. We
back to
might have
that
to like
palace one.
rebuild better,
The
And
image you got of the palace still blows my mind because I was looking at them too, and it's like I
mm,
get that they had this kind of stuff in also Mesopotamia and Egypt, but it still blows my mind because I'm so used to my passion had been for so long medieval history. And like you would
mm,
never see something like this back then. Like they couldn't pull that
yeah,
off if they wanted to. And we're literally in 1700 BC and they have these
on an island.
incredible palace complexes that are
Yeah.
insane. Like it's so impressive. Like I
I
just
know. I
can't
think that's the
explain
thing
it.
that I just like I can't get enough of like ancient history because it is just because it's going to keep happening. We've only really seen maybe one or two collapses so far, but it's like it's crazy how often the past was more advanced than the present.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's a more
Yeah.
modern connotation. I don't know what the right way to phrase it is. It's a modern assumption that technology always advances as time goes on. Throughout a lot of
Mm-hmm.
human history, it had not been
That
that
is
way.
not the case.
It
Yeah.
was a rise and a fall and a rise and a fall.
Yeah. And yeah, last thing, and then I want to move on about, but I love just the Minoan art style, and like they make these really strange looking dolphins that have like duck beaks, kind of. So anyway,
That's funny.
I would definitely have some of their art. I'd hang it up on my wall, but we'll come back to them. They're at their peak right now, and they're one of my favorite civilizations just because I mean, who doesn't love ancient Greece, you know? And it's kind of
And
like
like you said, kind of the origin or original European civilization. I really kind of see it that
yeah.
way too. Like it makes sense.
Well, and I don't even think we're quite near a lot of this stuff, but you know, this is at least the legend of the King Minos, where it's his son or his daughter is in the labyrinth, and then
Yes.
or no, there's a minotaur in the
Minotaur.
labyrinth, and someone goes in and he has the string that goes through the maze. But that's basically supposed to happen on Crete. But anyway, we're gonna get to like Troy and all these like the Odyssey and the Iliad and all that stuff, which is
We
just
gotta
cool
get
to
there
think
before
about because
July.
that's the legends for classical Greece. So it'll be fun, and
Yeah.
we're just at the very beginning. Was there anything else I wanted to say? Yeah, the thing I was talking about was on the island of Knossos, and it was, they believe, a massive earthquake followed by an intense
You know.
volcanic eruption and fires. Um,
But the tsunami, right, too, is what I heard
Probably a
because
tsunami too, yeah. So
obviously
that's kind of the worst of all
volcanic
worlds.
eruption isn't good, but the tsunami that follows can be devastating for anyone
Yeah.
within of it.
Imagine you're like you're just like hanging out on like a nice day in like June, and then all of a sudden, oh, it's an earthquake. Oh my God. And then all of a sudden the volcano erupts and then there's a tsunami. You're like,
Well, and again, we take it for granted what we know because they'll be like, "Wow, the water's receding. This is really cool. We should like go out into the water and see what's going on."
yeah.
It's
I hope
like,
yeah, they
oh,
didn't do
things
that.
are not going to go well for you.
And you see why they would think some sort of like god of volcanoes was mad at them. They're like, all right, we must have done something wrong because that was really intense. So yeah, Minoans, pretty cool.
Yeah.
Moving on to, oh, yeah, I guess I'll just say this because I had this written in my notes here. I was doing the New York Times. They have this weekly, like, it's called Flashback, and you just organize historical events. I recommend people look it up because
Wait,
it's
is it
free.
like one of their games? Sorry, not to
It's
go
one
on
of their
that.
games, but it's not, it weirdly, they don't list it with all their other games. It's like you have to
Okay.
search for it. They hide it. And only once a week, but you organize dates.
And what's it called?
It's just called New York Times Flashback Quiz. But I think last week they mentioned Enheduanna, who is the daughter of Sargon of Akkad, who started the
Okay.
Akkadian Empire. Because she is technically, a lot of people consider her the first author, because she
Really?
wrote about, you know, just kind of her life and everything.
That's interesting. Yeah, no,
So, yeah, I forget why they consider exactly the first author, because obviously people were just like, I guess she was the first one that wasn't just writing down like statistics for like how many goats you need to keep track of or something that we have evidence of. So anyway, but we're actually going to start in jolly old Egypt.
yeah, jolly old Egypt.
Jolly old
Well,
Egypt.
I've got a little bit more because last time I didn't have a lot about the 14th dynasty, but funny enough, it's because it's still basically just starting. It's not even agreed upon
Hmm.
when the fourth dynasty kind of broke away from the 13th. But it's between 1750 and 1700 ish. That's what's semi agreed on right
Hmm.
now. And it's essentially the Eastern Delta region with a city called Avaris. And it was mostly Canaanite and Levantine um, Egyptians. So they were Egyptian, but they had a lot of Canaanite and Levantine origin. And they were essentially looking at the 13th dynasty and being like, what are they really doing
They're
for us?
very weak.
Why do we even listen to them? We have, especially being where they are in the Delta, like we just showed with the previous with the Minoans, they're like, we have all the trade. We have all like the gold and everything is passing through us. Why are we talking to them? They can't even like keep their own stuff under control. So we're gonna break away and just be essentially our own dynasty. But
Yeah.
the funny thing too about that is there's a lot more to being your own dynasty than just, oh, we're independent now and we can do whatever we want. They
Hmm.
started to realize just that there's things like famine and drought and
It's
plague.
hard to run a business. Yeah.
Yeah, I know it seems obvious, but it's like they're like, wait a minute, now we have to deal with this on our own. We don't have somebody sending money down or at least trying to help or doing anything.
Right.
We're now on our own and we have to solve this problem. And so even though the break from Egypt was really clean, surprisingly, like the 13th dynasty was like, we don't really have time for this. We have way too much else going on. You want to be
Mhm.
independent? Go for it, guys. Like do you. Like it's fine. And so it's mostly the Eastern Delta region, but it eventually spreads to most of the Delta region. But what I thought was interesting enough is the 13th dynasty controlled pretty much most of the Nile, obviously excluding the Delta. They maintained control of most of the Nile, but the 13th was heavily impacted by the lack of trade. When the Delta broke
Yeah.
away, they're losing all
Yeah.
of the Mesopotamia, Asia, um,
Great.
yeah, Crete, the Minoans, all of that. All of that is gone, and they're losing all that trade. And so,
That yeah, the more I looked into them though, it kind of makes sense why some people consider the 13th dynasty it's still the Middle Kingdom because they
yeah,
basically are just like 12th dynasty junior. They're like
yeah,
essentially kind of the 12th dynasty.
and they pretty much lucked out. Where it's not like it's their fault or something in a bad way, but like the 12th, it gives so much validity to the 12th dynasty that their bureaucracy was so good that even when the 12th dynasty is fully gone, their bureaucracy
Lives on.
continues on without them and just keeps everything going, even when the 13th dynasty kings are just out of control, don't know how to run things. There's too many new kings. They can't keep track of anything. But at least the bureaucracy is just chugging along, doing what it does best, you know?
Yeah, and it's funny because when we're this far back, sometimes the sources are so wacky where it says like one guy is saying they ruled for like 150 years and someone else is like 450.
Well, same with I saw things that was like people debate whether it was 46 kings or 120 kings. And I'm like, that is a big difference. I don't
Yeah.
understand like how like it's a like oh, it's
Uh,
120, it's like 46. I don't know. It could be anything in between. It's a huge number.
yeah, and apparently the 13th dynasty ruled from Ijtawi, which, if you remember, was founded by Amenemhat the First, who was one of the first pharaohs we ever talked about. He ruled
Well, the
in
first of the 12th dynasty,
of the 12th dynasty, yeah. So
because we
it was
technically
way
touched
back.
on. Now I can't remember his name, but the one before him. Wow, I can't believe I'm blanking on it. But
I don't
the
know. Yeah, there's way.
11th dynasty.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, I remember when he started that, and now it's still the capital of the withered 13th dynasty.
And the one
And
thing
then
I was going to
yeah,
say,
it's
because
kind
it
of a
leads
weird
into a little bit
crossover with
later
the 14th dynasty.
with the 14th dynasty, it's more, I'm just setting up future things that by splitting, the kingdom of Egypt,
You get
they're
weaker.
kind of leaving themselves open for other people to come in eventually and say, hey, free real estate, we're in charge now. I just wanted to
Yeah.
say that.
So if you were watching on video, I'm basically showing a spoiler of in 50 years, which that's our plan for the next episode is to cover 1700 all the way to 1650.
I
So,
think we're going to cover a big time period because there is not a
yeah.
lot going on. So it's kind of easier to just cover a bigger time period and give you guys a bigger
And
idea
it
of
feels
big
like
picture.
1650 is a big moment where the Hyksos are going to take advantage of the weakened dynasties and they're going to really control at least most of northern Egypt. But that hasn't happened yet because there's still the 14th dynasty up in the Delta, as we said. And it
Mhm.
says they used to think their capital was at Zoi, Xois.
Yes, I read that too.
Zoe? I don't know how to say that.
But they said they think it's
Uh,
modern day is Avaris, right?
Avaris.
Yeah. I thought that was
So,
really funny because I almost was like, should I bring this up? I don't know if I can pronounce this correctly.
yeah, I know some of these words, but um, anyway, what else did I want to say about them? Someone was saying that essentially the only thing that really separates the 12th from the 13th dynasty was that it was the 14th dynasty rising up, the Canaanite immigrants sort of taking control is sort of like what gives it that dividing line. Because that's the thing
Yeah.
is, I've been looking more into all this stuff, and the dating that we still base everything off of is something that we've essentially done since like Plato. Like it's like really old.
Mhm.
Uh, so it's not 100% dependable, but anyway, that's just one theory is that like that's the splitting line is obviously because it gets smaller, but um, that's kind of the big change is that happening is kind of what starts the 13th dynasty. He proposes.
Yeah.
Anyway, I don't know. I'm trying to think like yeah, as we said, it's like Egypt, it's like okay, it's split in half. There's some like no-name pharaohs, like we don't have a ton. They weren't really making pyramids. The projects were smaller. They're trading with the Levant, like the Canaanites, the people in the Levant are, even just people from like the Western Mesopotamia are like continuing to come into the Nile region because it's very dependable. It doesn't have as many like droughts and bad years. It's
Yet
much more.
ironically, they're having bad years now. Sorry, I just thought that was so funny. Like, because it is funny that everyone's moving in because they're like, well, there's kind of free real estate because no one's really in charge and dictating anything, so we can kind of come in and just do what we want, and no one's gonna stop us.
But I think I didn't read anything about like like famines or like farming being super bad, but I
They
mean
mentioned it
it's
was
gonna
bad, but
happen
to be
eventually.
fair, it wasn't any more than any of the other dynasties. It was just more that since the dynasties had less cohesion, they were worse at dealing with it. That's the one thing I essentially read. There weren't more famines or more plagues
It's
than
less
there were in the
organized.
past. It was just that the response to them was much weaker because they weren't as unified.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's I don't know, it's kind of like splitting up into little not really states because it's not under a giant control, but it's splitting up. Um, One pharaoh from this time, from the 14th dynasty, was Nehesi. He's the one we kind of know the most about, which his name means the Nubian. So that's the other thing about the 14th is like, they're kind of known to be like the Canaanites, but it also seems like some of them at least were also like Nubian, which is people that were more further south.
Well, yeah, and speaking of that, I thought that was interesting that Amenemhat the First, they believe that his mom was Nubian. It just shows how
Hmm.
integrated. And I know we're going back a couple centuries, but it still shows how integrated Nubia was with Egypt as much as they tried to differentiate themselves from each other.
Yeah,
So,
true. The other thing, while we're talking about Egypt, was that since last episode, I kind of was interested. We mentioned something about the Bible, I forget, but I looked into it, and it was hard. It's really hard to find like exact years for this stuff. But what I kind of found was that in 2091 is when God sends Abraham to Egypt. So that's, we've already covered that a while back. That would have been before we even started recording. And then 2090, there's a famine in Canaan, so that's like one reason he stays in Egypt. And then he apparently dies in 1991 BC, which I just thought was weird because that was the year I was born.
wait, sorry, I apologize
Um,
again. Who dies?
Abraham,
Oh,
Abraham.
okay. Wow, that is
And
funny.
then, according to this one source, and then what I thought was kind of interesting too was specifically for 1700 BC, it says Israelites multiply in Egypt. So this is kind of just like they're just sort of like moving in and there's more like having babies
Yeah,
and
we're in
all that
like
stuff.
the
Really.
Joseph and the Technicolor Dreamcoat time period. Well, actually, we're past that,
We
but
are.
we're
Yeah, I did see that. That Joseph from this thing that I'm seeing here is right around like 1900 is when
yeah.
I saw Joseph. was sold into slavery in
I mean, it
Egypt.
makes sense. He's Abraham's son, so it's not like he can be that far
Yeah,
after him.
right,
But
right, right.
oh,
And then Jacob goes somewhere else in Egypt. So actually, according to this source I'm looking at, it's saying 1700 BC is when the pharaoh who did not know Joseph comes to power. So they're basically saying that they think Joseph, it would have made sense that he would have been around for this general time period when the Canaanites, the Hebrews, like, that whole group are in the area in Egypt, because then it made sense that he would have been friendly with the pharaoh if it was like this, or the Hyksos that are about to come. But then, so then by 1700, well, that doesn't really make sense actually, based on what I'm about to say, because then it says in 1700, this is when the pharaoh who doesn't know Joseph comes to power, and they aren't as friendly to the Jews. But again, this is the
but
story
it
in
kind
the
of tracks
Bible,
with the
so this,
story at least. It
yeah,
doesn't track exactly, but I
it's
just mean
never
where
exactly, yeah.
because again, like we talked about the right. We're talking about the 14th dynasty either rose as early as 1750 BC or as late as like 1700, maybe even 1680. So it's just hard to know. And then we're talking about the 15th with the Hyksos, and they're coming after that. So
Yeah, so definitely next week we'll get to jump into like the beginning of the Hyksos, and there's some stuff that's going to happen with the Hittites, who we mentioned last week. But
mhm.
somewhere where there is a record of what happened, or at least more of a record, is Mesopotamia.
It is funny because I'm
Um,
about to almost contradict it. Not completely, but what I mean is, so we are with Ibi Esha, and they said he is the first of the last four kings of the dynasty. And at first I was like, why do they phrase it that way? That's a weird thing to put it. It's because the last four kings of the dynasty, there is not much known about them. So, and it's
Wait,
funny
sorry, the
how
dynasty of Babylon?
Babylon, and what's crazy is just
Yeah.
how quickly the mighty have fallen, if you will, because we're talking about uh Abi Esha is literally the grandson of Hammurabi, and he's just watching kind of everything fall apart. So he's doing what he can.
Wait, say his name again?
Um, Abi Esha, ABI hyphen ESHUH,
Is the son of Hammurabi?
grandson.
Oh, grandson, because his son was Samsu-Iluna, right?
Yes, the one who
So
fought
wait, do
against
you
all the rebels.
before we get into him, I kind of want, because I better wrapped my head around like what exactly happened, kind of what we talked about last time,
Last
but
episode.
I
Yeah.
think it's just good to reiterate. So basically, we had Hammurabi. He had made Babylon, huge. Like if you're looking at this map, he would have had what's on here as Babylon, and basically what's on here is Assur, and a little bit more. But then when he dies, Samsu-Iluna um, is ruling, and kind of right off the bat, it's not going great. But I have here that in 1742, the Great Revolt erupts. So there's a
Hmm.
rebellion against
We talked
him,
about that with like Rimsin.
and
The second.
Rimsin is in Larsa, and he's leading the rebellion, and he defeats the north quickly, but the south is a lot harder, and he does eventually kind of conquer it, but then um and he tears down the walls of Uruk and Isin, and that's one reason the south kind of like falls into disrepair, and kind of we don't know as much, so I think because he basically destroyed his own former kingdom and stuff. So a lot of these cities got destroyed. And not only that, but then after this war, he destroys a lot in the south, and that's when the Sealand Empire swoops
Yeah.
in, and they take over southern, basically what we call Sumer. Um,
Essentially all of Sumer, and that's where we talk about the
yeah,
depopulation. And not to go into that again, it still just blows my mind, I think, because this podcast had us get
yeah,
into such nitty-gritty for how
yeah,
important these cities were and how big of a deal it was. And to just be like,
yeah,
oh, no one lives there. Uruk, it's
yeah,
gone. I'm like, what? This is
yeah.
crazy. I don't know.
But there were still some. It wasn't like they were all just fully destroyed. It was just like a
Oh, no,
lot of
no,
the
they
big
weren't. It's
ones,
just
like
They're
Nipper.
backwaters now.
A lot of them just switch sides. A lot of them just don't like Babylon anymore, and they switch to the Sealand. Like I saw that like Nipper. I mean, I don't know how like much it was their decision, but pretty much right after Samsu-Iluna dies, so after Hammurabi's son dies, um, the Nippur, who was used to be or still kind of is a really important city in Mesopotamia, is like the head of their god, like was supposed to be there, and they joined the Sealand Empire.
Well, yeah, it's more just that it was right at the end of, um, yeah, Hammurabi's son. He wasn't able to hold on to Nippur. It split, but at the same time, they saw it as almost a tactical retreat. In the same point that Babylon saw that there was no, especially with the depopulation and the reduction in agricultural availability and water resources, that Sumer was just not that important anymore. It could be more or less ignored. Not ignored per se, because again, he was annoyed about they fought the Sealand Empire, but it wasn't another Larsa. It wasn't another Isin. It wasn't another Earthry dynasty. It was just sort of like a thorn in the side of Babylon a little bit, but nothing more than that.
Or at least, yeah, we just don't really know what they were up to too much. Yeah,
Well, yeah,
what
because what's funny is how most I don't know why they talked about how people are still trying to figure out a lot of like the pottery and a lot of the stuff that came from that region because most of what we know about them is just from Babylon. I don't know if it's just they
Mhm.
didn't write anything down or we just don't have record of it because it was such a small,
That's
short-lived
the thing.
period.
Yeah, is I think that can be hard. Is like, there's a chance that there's like some giant. I mean, it couldn't have been that huge, but like some
Mhm.
big group that was like, somewhere in the mountains that was really powerful, but they just like for example, I saw like for Sealand, they think they used waxed wooden boards. Like maybe they just used a lot of wood and things like that, where it just all disintegrated.
Oh, well, and to be fair, that makes sense because it's something I thought was interesting is they said a lot of Babylon and Sumer and Akkad use that as well. It's just that was more of like a our paper versus when you print something, or I don't mean to be more digital, but all I mean is they would write it down just quickly, kind of averagely in wax, and they would
Mhm.
just use like a stick to carve it in, and then
Yeah,
when it was important, they'd put it into stone. But for
right.
whatever reason, it seems like the lands or the Sealand Empire didn't put a lot into stone, or if they did, we don't have a lot of it that we've been able to
Mhm.
find, and that's more of the issue.
Right. I mean,
So,
it's similar with like South America, where it's like a lot of the stuff they probably just made out of wood or made out of like more like
or Rome.
biodegradable like materials, and it's like it's not like the number one priority of these civilizations wasn't like, wow, I need this to last for thousands of years so that
Which is
people can
so
like,
true. It's funny how we think about that stuff where it's like they didn't write anything down about their society. And it's like, no, they did. They just didn't carve it into
into
stone that would last
stone.
thousands of years because they
Yeah.
weren't thinking about, man, I really hope a professor in 3,000 years can read this rock and know about me. Like,
They thought the
they
same
were.
way about how we like write in our notes app on our phone. We're not like,
Mhm.
oh yeah, some archaeologist in the year 3000 is going to go through my notes app and be like, oh, this is what life
No,
was
I
like.
fully agree. It's something that I find myself running into sometimes where I'm like, I can't believe they didn't bother writing anything down. And it's like, no, 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 they did. They just didn't write it in a way that lasted this long because that wasn't their priority. It was more
Yeah.
of a, you know,
Yeah, there's stuff
they
going
had
on.
so many other problems to worry about than will this hold up in a museum? Like,
Yeah. So we just kind of got lucky, and then it kind of it's sort of like how I feel like, the ancient Greeks, like they wrote all these legends about all these wars, and it makes it seem like Greece is like the center of the world. It's like, oh my God, that's where everything cool was happening. But like once you actually look more into history, it's like, all right, there was some cool stuff happening there, but there was also really crazy stuff happening with like Persia or something. And so it's sort of like we just have evidence of like Babylon and the Assyrians and like the Egypt, but like it definitely is giving us like a bias just because we know about them. So we're like, oh, they were obviously the best, but like we really don't know for sure.
no, and I agree. That's what I think is so interesting. It's why I feel bad in this podcast sometimes because we'll cover so much about Mesopotamia or Egypt, and it's more that that's just all we have to talk
It's
about
just
because
easier.
we
Yeah.
covered the Americas once or twice, but there's it's hard to really go into it without just saying, well, over the 500 years this happened, which is easy to predict. But
Yeah.
when we do an episode about 2 century or not 2 centuries, 2 decades, how do you really cover that? So
Mhm.
I like that next episode and some of the episodes. I like that we get episodes like this where it almost feels like everything's going crazy, everything's falling apart, but it gives us time to kind of step back, look at the world, and see what's going on. Like here's a reevaluation of
Yeah.
what's happening everywhere.
And yeah, I like hear things that you tell me and then I look into them and it leads to all these like tangents. And we have recorded a 40-minute episode already for what's
Well,
theoretically
we
a
thought this would be so short, but I'm not complaining. It's just funny how this
yeah.
happens. We get so into it, and then we always think, "Oh, this will be a 30-minute episode," and then it's like an
Yeah.
hour later. We're like, "Oh, wait, we're not even done yet." But okay.
So I don't know. I think that's all I really had to say. It's essentially like, yeah, Sealand's happening and Babylon's not at its peak. Assyria is starting to get more independent because Babylon's weaker. This is kind of the beginning, not really the beginning of Assyria, but things are definitely building there.
We're looking
And
at kind of the fall of Babylon, though, because again, we've got the grandson of Hammurabi, Abi Esha, and I don't have a lot to say about him. That's what's funny. He
yeah,
mainly was just trying to keep everything together. He's fighting Eshnunna again. He's fighting Land, Sea, or Sealand. Sorry, I keep mixing those up. And
land
then
sea.
he's fighting the long-term enemy that we always talk about, um, the Elamites. Um, and that's essentially it. He's just trying to hold on while things just go crazy.
Did
I
you
mean,
see
they had
Belbani in Assyria? Did you read about Belbani?
I did not actually, so you can go into that if you want. Yeah.
So apparently Belbani was well, so going back a little bit, Assyria, we had Shamshi-Adad. We talked a lot about him. He
Mhm.
was powerful in Assyria. And then sometime after he died, the city kind of was essentially just an independent city state. And then they were all kind of like internally fighting. And there's this interesting thing where they were naming like, oh, all these kings were like fighting for control, but then now they think, oh, actually, those weren't all kings. Those were just like they were called like limus,
Mhm.
and they were like the officials that got appointed at each year, and that's what gave the year its name in Assyria. Was like it'd be like yeah, like there's a new vice president every year, and the year's named after who's the vice president, which I thought was just kind of interesting.
Yeah.
And yeah, so then the infighting essentially came to an end when Bel Bani becomes king, but that's in the year 1700 BC, essentially.
Yeah, because I had that
So
written down. Yeah.
he founds the Abbasid dynasty, who's um, apparently ruled Assyria for about 1,000 years after this. So
That's crazy. I did not see that. That's
it's one of those
impressive.
things where Belbani is like, it's almost like retroactively, once Assyria gets really big, they like look backwards and they're like, okay, this Belbani guy was like technically like the start of this like dynasty it's gonna, yeah, I mean, I'm looking at it right now and it's gonna go until 609 BC, I believe.
Holy crap. That's impressive.
So,
It really is.
yeah,
Look at some of these dynasties and
or at
stuff. They
least
live
that's
for
how
a
long
while.
Assyria, yeah. That's the last Assyrian king, I think. Anyway, so yeah, he was the son of Adasi, who is one of these, probably one of these Lemus.
Yeah,
And
Adasi is one of the ones I have.
oh, nice. Okay.
Yeah,
Did
he restored the dynasty system to Assyria after kind of the civil war. And he
oh,
removed any
yeah.
vestiges. I put he removed any vestiges of Amorite Babylonian influence. They
Right.
did not like that. They wanted to be independent, and not just independent in terms of you know government wise, but also culturally. They're like, we're not just going to be ruled by the Babylonians.
Yeah, it really seems like I don't know. I think because we hear about Hammurabi so much and we think of him as like, wow, he must have been really like ethical because he invented this law system, but it's like I mean, maybe he wasn't horrible, but like it definitely seems like a lot of people did not like being ruled over by the Babylonians.
Well, and it makes sense when we went through it. It's so funny when it's like I've learned it from to go on that tangent of Crusader Kings and stuff. It is so easy to capture a ton of land. It is so much harder for your children and your grandchildren to rule that land without it all rebelling and being like, we don't want to be part of this. Like, I don't know.
So I just saw it. It's all the way this guy S Haddon, Esser Haddon. He rules all the way in 600 like 80 BC. So it's
Wait,
like him and
ADBC. Sorry, that threw me
no
off.
that yeah, like this guy is ruling in like 680 BC, and him and his sons are the ones who really start to like revere Belbani and be like, he restored stability, he founded the dynasty, he kind of got like a mythical status, and that's like 1500 years later they randomly
Yeah.
do
I mean,
that.
it is funny how that happens where you don't, even the guy at the time doesn't realize that's what he's doing. Because you have certain people like Hammurabi where they realize, like, oh, we're setting up something different. But then you have guys like Ishbi Era who broke free from like Earthly Dynasty to just be like, yeah, I'm just gonna like be an Isin and just kind of do my own thing and kind of take the remnants of what you have left. Not realizing that he turned that into a massive Istin dynasty that ruled Sumer and Akkad for like a century. Like
Yeah. Did you read anything about the Kassites?
I did not because they come in later. So I
They
was
they
gonna.
are going to come in later, so that's why I had seen that they technically make their first appearance in history. This is a little bit back, but 1741
I
BC.
do have that. We're fighting against the. Sorry, I had his name.
It's in the
Uh,
name year of Samsu-Iluna. His ninth
yeah.
year is called the Year of the Kassite Army.
Yep. And that I had it written down that it was and they eventually rule Babylonia. Spoiler alert. But that is the first reference to the Kassites at all.
And the Kassites come from the Zagros Mountains, which I had a picture of somewhere, but now I have way too many pictures, so I can't find it. Um, oh, this was a picture I found of Joseph, I think, and I just like that he
That's
looks very Egyptian.
crazy how like he's got the little halo thing, like with the medieval like blessed by God, but he's also in
Yeah,
like the
he's also
Pharaoh's
Egyptian.
outfit. That is crazy to me.
I know. Where it's in Evangelismos, which is in Alexandria, I believe.
That makes way more sense too. I thought like because if you said that was in like Greece, like it fits the
Yeah.
motif. It just doesn't fit like their I don't know how to explain it. Their culture. It doesn't fit.
Yeah.
This is
This is
interesting.
one
What
thing.
is yeah.
Oh, this is really random. I just meant to mention, and I don't know, I didn't fully confirm this, but I did see that the last mammoth died on Wrangel Island in 1700.
That is
It's right here,
crazy.
right next to Alaska and Russia.
I can't believe the Russians and the Americans would do that.
I know they hunt. I know. I do wonder if the last mammoth was killed by a human, or if it just like ran out of food.
Probably died. Thunderous applause.
They should make a movie about the last mammoth.
They did. It's called Ice Age.
Oh,
Um,
true. That's
it's
the
a true
last
story.
squirrel too. Or
True,
no,
it
that's
is.
the first
They're
squirrel.
making Ice Age 6. I want to put it out there for
No,
everyone.
wait. I think they're literally on Ice Age like 12.
No, they're not, but they're
Are
coming
they
out
on
with a new Ice
6
Age and
still?
it's Ice Age 6. They're not calling it Ice Age 6, but it is
Oh,
the
okay.
sixth one. And it's
Yeah,
gonna
they
change
kind
your
of lost
life.
control with
That's all I
that
can say is that
series.
it's definitely better than Backrooms and Obsession. I don't know why people care so much about those movies. Ice Age 6 is where it's at.
Hell yeah. Um,
Um,
the last thing I really wanted to kind of wrap up with was China, but like, I don't know, of all the things we covered, I feel like, is there anything we want to go back to? Assyria,
Not
Sealand
really. Again, I just had the
Empire.
grandson of I had Ibi Esha, but it's mostly him. Just he fought a couple wars defending his father's territory, but lost a lot of land, and that's kind of all we really know about him. Like,
Hmm.
yeah, he's the
Okay.
first of the last four kings. It's such a weird way to phrase it. He is the first of the last four kings of the first Babylonian dynasty. And it's
That is
because the
really
last four
confusing.
kings of the first Babylonian dynasty, there is not much known about them.
Yeah. But
So,
one thing I kind of like about doing the research for these episodes is when it's like a time like this, a lot of them it's like, okay, this Wikipedia is 2 sentences long, this guy doesn't have an article, and but then every so often you stumble on someone and it's like, oh, like who's this random guy? And it's like, oh, the king of Mari at this time was doing really well, and so we know his name, and so I
mhm.
kind of like when that happens.
No, I do. I do too.
Um, but I wish I had a picture ready to go, but the one big culture we haven't really touched on hardly at all on this podcast so far is China. And so what I saw was that right around in 1700 is when the Xie dynasty is in, or Xia dynasty is ending,
I think it's
and
Sha.
the Shang dynasty is starting.
Well, because yeah, I know it's 1700 or 1650 is when they start. And what's funny about this time period is the Xia dynasty, XIA, I'm saying it out loud so that people know, but I'm pretty sure it's Xia,
Yeah.
um, is not a real dynasty. That it seems like the Shang dynasty kind of, and same with the Zhong dynasty that comes after them, kind of point to this dynasty as a way to legitimize themselves, kind of the things we've talked about before, because there were definitely people living in China, the Yellow River Valley. Definitely their culture existed. I'm not trying to take away from that. But the Xia dynasty, it
It
seems
wasn't
more
really like a
mythical.
dynasty of like a huge
Yeah,
empire. It was a culture of people, but it got like turned into a legend
it got
where
turned
like a
into a
guy
legend,
is.
and we have no record that that dynasty or any people from that dynasty ever existed.
But I also thought it was interesting. I forget where I like heard this, but most cultures back then had some flood myth where, and pretty much in
Yeah.
all of them, the flood happens and there's one guy or one family who builds a boat or does something and they survive and everyone else dies. But China is kind of the only culture that their myth is there's the flood and the king is just such a Chad that he like
Yeah.
redirects it and
He,
like.
he solves it himself. I still love that. I think we talked about that episode 1. I still think that is the funniest thing in the world.
But I think it does actually like it kind of says a lot, I think, about their culture is that they're like, you know, when you got lemons, make lemonade, like they're just like we're gonna control like our surroundings and like
No,
bend
I
it to their
agree. It's
will.
just funny too, though, that it buys so much into the whole the nobles and the kings deserve to rule us because they're like the king. He literally carved out the path by himself. Like, how could you
Yeah.
deny that he should be emperor? And it's
But
like,
that is why they're eventually, I forget when exactly they create this, but they're gonna do the mandate of heaven
oh,
where
this is it. It's when the Shang take over that they try to explain that there's this mandate of heaven and it supported them, but it supports us now because the mandate of heaven is you're supposed to be so I don't know the right way to phrase it because it's not totally pure of heart. But what they complain is the last
yeah,
Shah emperor he was too hedonistic. All he cared about was his
yeah.
sex slaves and torturing people and taxing the population. And they came in and were like, no, 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 no. Like, we're here. We care about the people. We're canceling debts. Spoilers from Babylon, but we're canceling debts. And we're not going to make you sell your children into slavery. And on a side note, too, with that, they had chariots, which I don't know why, even though it makes total sense because China did it first.
Mhm.
It was blowing my mind to see Chinese chariots. Like, I don't know why. Like, I'm not trying to take anything away from them, but like, when I think chariots, I think so much of like these Egyptian type chariots. And Egypt was
Yeah.
honestly late to the party. Like, China was the ones having them way before them. And it was
Hmm.
just funny to see these Chinese chariots. But to be fair, they did talk about they weren't used much for war in the combat sense. They were more of like, the general can see what's going on. We can move goods around back and forth.
Because
We can
they're
bring
expensive
weapons
to
to the front.
make. Yeah.
Like, but still, it was cool. Like they were way ahead of their time
Well, that's
using
what China
chariots.
does a lot of is they invent these things ridiculously early, but they don't necessarily use them for like battle. It's like they invent gunpowder, but it's to do like fireworks and stuff. And it's kind of cool. It's like they just invent it just for like the fun of it, and then they're like, "Cool, we made," or it's like a medicine or something.
No, I
Um,
fully agree. It's cool.
so I'm excited, yeah, because now we're actually getting into like the somewhat like historical part of China, and it's cool because even a lot of the stuff from this time. So basically, there's this guy Tang of Shang, and he was the first king of the Shang dynasty. But the first king of the Shang dynasty, basically the first Chinese ruler that we actually have um,
Evidence.
evidence of in contemporary records, what I saw isn't until 1250 BC, Wu Ding. I don't know. It specifically just says he's the earliest figure in Chinese history mentioned in contemporary records.
It
I'm not
makes
really sure
sense.
exactly what that means, but
One of the things I saw that was funny is the reason we know about the Shang at least being real, is that they kept records on turtle shells and weirdly of all things, I know it's still bone, but specifically cow shoulder bones. I don't
hmm,
know why it was
they're just in good
specifically those,
shape.
but they mentioned that cow shoulder bones and turtle shells they would carve into and they would burn them. They would bury them and burn them and do different things and read the cracks, which is giving me funny enough Scandinavian Viking vibes. But like they would do
Yeah.
that to figure out what's going
Well,
on. But the
I
cool thing about the
yeah.
Chinese, no, not to interrupt, sorry, that I
Yeah,
thought
no,
was
keep
so
going.
cool was instead of just saying, like, will we win this battle and then burning it in the fire and trying to read the things, they were so meticulous about giving details. They're like, well, it's almost like they're planning for the future because they're literally sitting there and they're like, well, I actually conquered this region, and I have 3 wives, and I have 12 sons, and I rule this territory, and I feel like my battle with this guy who rules these lands with this many kids. I feel like when we battle, I'm probably gonna win. What do you think? And the reason I'm going through all the detail is it means when we dig them up and discover it, we're like, wow, he listed out everything. He just explained everything that was going on completely, and then
That's
just buried
interesting.
it. Like it's
Yeah, I
really
mean that kind of makes me think like a lot of people draw the connection where like ancient magic and like writing are like really similar. Where like I know it sounds cheesy, but like even the word spell, like when you spell a word and it's like spell is like magic, but
hmm
it's like that's my guess is it has some connection there where they thought you have to be really specific about what your issue is or what you're trying to figure out. And maybe even just the act of like writing it out so specifically like helped people like think about it or something like better. Um, but yeah, it's also crazy because like it would have only been like the Chinese shamans that could even read back then, probably because I mean, if all we really have is evidence of these bone oracles, then that means maybe there weren't even like the traders weren't like writing things down, or we just don't.
well, not really, and it's something I'll get into next time because I wanted to read into it. It's funny how because it contrasted with Minoan and Mesopotamian society. In a lot of Asian societies, including Japan, China, Korea, merchants were the bottom, below peasants. They were seen as
Hmm.
like below. Whereas in Minoan society, in Mesopotamian society, in Egyptian society, they were seen as above peasants. And I'll try to do more research on it. I'm sure there's people listening who understand, but it's just a funny contrast to me. And so that's why I actually think the merchants weren't reading and stuff all that much because they were considered the lower classes of society. They were seen as more expendable, least important, least valued in society, at least in
Hmm.
Asian cultures. Um,
That's the hard thing about this podcast is it makes me want to like go and like reread all these books, but I can't read like all of them at once. 'Cause-
Especially when
But
we're doing something every week, which I'm not complaining about, but it doesn't give you a
yeah,
lot of time to really dig into it in terms of if you want to read a whole book.
but you were also saying the Oracle thing. I read this book that is called Magic, a History, but honestly, it wasn't as cool as I thought it would be. But it's more about what you were just saying, where like ancient people, like prehistoric people, would do a lot of that kind of stuff where they would use like different animal bones and turtle shells and like snail shells and like all this random stuff that we just don't think about now, but like that was the original, like that's all you really had. It's like unless you were gonna sew clothes or all this stuff that would take a really long time, it's like, oh, you can just take an animal and like use its bone and like this specific bone is like the perfect shape for like a hammer and this one's good for like a knife and you can like I don't know, it's something that like no one would ever care about now, but it was like everyone probably would be like an expert on all the different bones of like every animal, and they're using it for these like oracle
Well,
things
and
and
what's funny that I read that's kind of good, kind of bad, because you'll see what I mean. The reason we know so much about the Shang Dynasty is because they wrote things on bones, and the bones lasted. But it's not only that, that for a long time, a lot of Chinese medicine, and even in modern day, requires grinding up bones and drinking them for different sort of Chinese medicine ailments. And so the thing was, they found a lot of these bones and they would grind them up to turn them into powders. It sucks because that means a lot of these bones, a lot of these records were destroyed to turn into medicine and powders. But the positive is they wouldn't have even been looking for these things or found these things if they weren't digging around being like, we need bones so that we can turn them into powder. So they would find these stashes of bones with all these markings on them. And they would be like, oh, this must be important. So it's probably good for medicine. But on a side note, it allowed other people to find them and be like, hey, wait a minute. These are historical records of a dynasty we know very little about. I don't know. It's like a win
yeah.
lose like kind of thing. It's cool. Like,
Yeah, I don't know. I love there's something just cool to think about that these like ancient like Shang dynasty shamans were like I'm just imagining it's kind of like someone playing dice, like they're hunched over, they're like rolling it and they're like reading the bones, and that's the reason we can like understand like what their whole culture was doing.
yeah, it
Yeah,
is
so
so
anyway,
fun.
we're at an hour and 1 minute. I think this is our longest episode. So
Yeah, we might need to. Yeah.
I think I think we might want to wrap it up. And I'm a little nervous for our 50-year episode next week, but I think it might actually end up being shorter because we'll have to summarize. And like I also like we covered a lot of different civilizations that like we're not going to keep coming back to. We're not going to go like, okay, and then this emperor was in China. It's like, I'm not going to cover the Minoans again. And I think I'm going to save, I was going to talk about the Indus Valley because they apparently, I feel like I've said this like several times already, but like this is when they come to an end, and then this new culture that's called Cemetery H takes over, and that just was such a weird name for a culture.
Well, kind of like
Cemetery
the
H.
Minoan script A. I don't know. It's
Yeah,
just
linear A. Yeah, I
linear
know.
A. There you go.
That's the thing.
Yeah.
That's why archaeologists and like even like historians and like people like that need to all like hire like writers or like editors or something that like can name things, because like history would be so much better if they would like if it was instead of cemetery H culture they called it like the bone hunters, like if they just gave it like a
They need
sick
a cool
name.
PR team. Yeah.
Like I get obviously why they want to be like this is the site they were found, so we want it to be as neutral as possible, but I don't know, they should have like a popular term for like when you're just like learning about them, because like
I do what you mean. I mean, like
yeah,
dinosaur. I know it means terrible lizard, but like that's just a cool name.
it's
Like
just
it
a
could
cool
have been
name.
anything, and it's
It could
dinosaur.
have sounded
Like
stupid, you're right, yeah.
it's a cool name. Like
Names are very important, yeah. Like I feel like even when I see like a king that has like a really hard name, I'm like, maybe we don't need to talk about him. It's like
you
that's
mean,
too
and then you
weird.
have cool ones. Remember, like Goon Goonum. That was
Gun Gunham,
fun
yeah.
to say. I liked talking about Goon
I'm gonna
Goonum.
name a video game character that someday because that's
Yeah.
that's a good name. So next week I'm gonna talk about Cemetery H. I'm gonna talk about Oxus. They were in like Central Asia, and they're actually like kind of more significant than you would think. And the Mitanni, they're kind of another like vaguely Mesopotamian area, like Zagros Mountain type people. And the Hurrians. I don't think we've really
Ooh.
talked about the
They're
Hurrians.
very
So
quick. They don't like
all
to
that
take
going on, and we're gonna I don't know. We'll see how it goes, but our plan is to jump all the way to 1650,
a
get
lot
things
happens in
really moving
1650.
along.
Yeah.
But I'm enjoying the Bronze Age. It's one of my favorite time periods, so but it'll be kind
We've
of even
learned a
more fun
lot.
once we get to like a little further in when the evidence is stronger.
I mean, we've learned a lot. Hopefully, the listeners have
There's a
learned a lot
lot.
too. I feel like there's a lot going on. So,
There's a lot. There's always a lot going on. Speaking of a lot going on,
ooh,
why don't you try to take a minute out of your day, your busy days, and like and subscribe on any podcast app, on YouTube, like us on Instagram, give us 5 stars. Just, why not do it all?
Yeah, why not?
It'd be great. I've been
It's
seeing
my
our
favorite
numbers.
Pokemon. Why
They're
not?
growing. We're slow but steady. We've been getting some more followers. I had someone message me. I actually got our
Really?
first message this week.
Oh crap!
So
Really?
I'm actually going to read it in honor of the first ever Lost Decades listener
Now I'm
message.
actually really impressed.
Let's see. And it's something that unfortunately I don't think we'll be able to really cover for a while, but it made me want to look more into it. So maybe next week I will try to see like just if anything's going on. But Babs the Boneless
Ooh.
said, would be interested to hear you talk about the early decades of the Caribbean. Just read Colin Woodward's Republic of Pirates and have been stuck on the early days of expansion. Like what y'all are starting. So
Awesome.
I sent them a message, but if you want to message us, feel free. I try to respond to all them. And I appreciate everyone who's been listening so far. We've been learning a lot doing this, and I hope you guys have learned some as well. All right. Until next time, do what I watched this movie a couple weeks ago called The Lost City of Z. Oh, I already said the word. But
Oh,
in some part of that movie, they got lost.
get lost.